Welcome to the Women's Role in Water Quality in the Midwest webinar presented by the E-Extension Women in Agriculture Learning Network. I'm Beth Holtzman and I coordinate the network. Our technical coordinator for today is Lisa Scarborough from Iowa State University. I'm from the University of Vermont Extension. The mission of the Women in Agriculture Learning Network is to help women in agriculture improve their quality of life and make better business decisions. This national initiative is developing a new portal for education, technical assistance, and support of women farmers, ranchers, and producers. I'd like to encourage each of you to enter your email address in the chat pod so that we can send you follow-up information. We'll also be sending you a link to a short evaluation survey about the webinar and about other topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Your feedback and suggestions are very important to us and are helping to shape what we do. It's also helpful for presenters if you could tell us where you're from. That would be your town and county and state. So if you haven't already done that, please take a moment now. And now on to today's webinar. Today's presenters are Jamie Benning, who is Water Quality Program Manager with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. She'll be presenting on current water quality issues that are of increasing importance in the Grain Belt and the perspective and approaches she is seeing women, landowners, farmers, and professionals take to address these challenges. Joining Jamie will be farmer Kellie Blair, who will share her perspective on water quality in Iowa and describe her experiences with using conservation practices to improve water and soil quality on her grain and livestock farm in north central Iowa. Welcome, Jamie and Kellie, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today and for the opportunity to be here. Water is an exciting topic right now. Certainly is critical and important for all of us, and it's only been increasing in the awareness and public, awareness of water quality issues and water topics as they impact farmers in Iowa. So today, what we hope to do is to give an overview of water issues in the Midwest and in Iowa, our perspective here in Iowa on our nutrient reduction strategy, the role that we see for women landowners, women farmers, and other professionals in terms of connecting with women and helping them to be collaborators on improving water quality. And then Kellie will share her perspective as a farmer in north central Iowa and the challenges they see on their farm and some of the practices and different methods they have implemented to address water issues. So first I'm going to talk about kind of the background and why we have some of these challenges that we do in Iowa in the Midwest. Iowa's land use, this map here shows the land use in the mid-1800s, and you can see the pale, I had a technical difficulty with the map. This is our pale yellow area is our current agricultural vegetation. Primarily, or most of that had been in grassland, in tall grass prairie, perennial grasses, prior to that conversion of that land to agricultural production when Iowa was settled. So that conversion of land from perennial crops, grasses, to a row crop system throughout the state has presented some challenges. We have crops growing for a shorter time throughout our growing season, which presents challenges in the spring where the land is not covered and protected from heavy rainfall events that we receive in the spring, and also absorbing, uptaking, and using nutrients for a shorter part of the season versus those perennial grasses. So that has presented a challenge, and we are working within the system now, and I'll talk about some of those solutions that can be incorporated into our current agricultural production systems to address some of those challenges, keep more of the nutrients and soil in the fields. I'll just do a little bit of background on water issues. Our pollutants are the concerning chemicals and elements that are entering our water through two main sources. Point source, which is a place where we know where that water or those pollutants are leaving a source, such as in the picture there, a sewer outfall. We have a known place where that water is leaving, either a factory, a wastewater treatment plant, and we have a known place and can more easily identify where that's coming from versus our other category, which is a non-point source pollutant, where we don't have an identified source. And an example of that is runoff from row crop fields, can also be from areas within an urban or suburban area where we can measure pollutants in a stream, but we can't pinpoint exactly where they came from. So that does present a large challenge in terms of reducing those pollutants as they enter the stream because we don't have that known source for them. Some common agricultural non-point source pollutants. Our number one pollutant is soil or sediment. As land is tilled and exposed to rainfall, it can leave the field if it's not protected by residue or a growing crop. With that soil or through other processes, we can lose nutrients from that crop field. Nitrogen is lost typically through leaching, through our groundwater or through tile systems. Phosphorus can be lost by both movement with that surface flow or rainwater over the surface of the soil and carried with the soil, or in a dissolved form that also moves with water. Also, herbicides, insecticides could be lost with water as it moves across the field. And then pathogens are also a concern with manure application. Bacteria and viruses are concerning and could potentially enter our water bodies. There are also urban non-point source pollutants. Stormwater has the same kind of effect as water falling in rural and agricultural landscapes. It can run over construction sites, lawns, parking lots, and carry with it whatever particles of chemicals or sediments that are exposed and can move with that water. So sediment, oil, other petroleum products, nutrients or pesticides that are applied to lawns and golf courses and other urban areas. Bacteria as well from animals in an urban setting, from application of manure. I guess that typically doesn't happen in an urban area, but compost and other things that are applied in an urban landscape. Sediment sources, again, if we think about tillage, we talked about that a bit. Feedlots can also be a source of sediment, both from the agricultural landscapes. On the urban side, construction sites, stormwater runoff, as we discussed. Nutrients sources of nutrients for non-point sources come from agricultural fertilizers, from manure, also lawn fertilizers and turf fertilizers that are applied to golf courses and other turf areas. Some of the impacts that these pollutants can have, certainly one of the main concerns is unsafe drinking water. With nitrates, our concern is the consideration of young infants, 6 months and younger, with nitrates over 10 parts per million. That has an increased chance that it could cause an issue called blue baby syndrome, where oxygen is depleted within the system. So that's certainly a very high-level concern, and unfortunately it doesn't happen often, but is one of the reasons why we're concerned about nitrates. Certain strains of bacteria, such as E. coli, can cause severe illness if those enter drinking water, or in situations of recreation, if someone were to ingest water with bacteria, certainly it could also subject them to illness. The highest level of concern, of course, is for source water, or the water that is used for drinking water, so either drawn from surface water sources, such as a reservoir, river, or drawn from a well, and any contaminants located within source water is of highest concern, for human health concerns. Some of these pollutants certainly can have aquatic impacts as well. Sediment can physically fill in lakes and streams. It can alter habitat and alter the areas that fish and wildlife can use for breeding, and also can reduce visibility within those lakes and streams, impacting wildlife. Beach closures are typically due to bacteria in the water and high level concern around areas where there's human contact with water. So that is a high concern. Certainly reduce the aesthetic and recreational value of those rivers and lakes if there are sediments and contaminants entering those bodies of water. Fish kills are definitely a concern, and also algae blooms. One concern that we hear quite a bit about is hypoxia, and some of the issues that I talked about before are more local concerns or impacts that losing some of these nutrients and sediment from urban and rural areas can have on our local water bodies, our rivers, lakes, streams, and our drinking water sources. Hypoxia is an issue that for us in the Midwest, the nutrients and the sediment that leave our farm fields and areas and urban areas and are entering our streams, flowing down the Mississippi River and into the Gulf of Mexico is contributing to an issue called hypoxia. Sometimes this is called the dead zone. It's an area where there's very little oxygen. The nutrients from the Midwest, so Iowa and our states around us that are highly agricultural, use a lot of nutrients, but also are prone to loss of those nutrients. They're accelerating the production of marine phytoplankton, and as those phytoplankton grow, they consume oxygen. As they die, they consume oxygen. The decomposition consumes oxygen. So as that oxygen is used in that process, it's not available for fish, shrimp, and other aquatic life in the Gulf of Mexico, and that causes challenges for those involved in the shrimping and fishing industry. This is a breakdown of the relative share of nutrients that are delivered to the Gulf from states in the Corn Belt and the entire Mississippi Basin. So those in green are not losing a lot, or are not contributing a lot to the overall nutrient load. And as you increase there from pink, red, and the dark red, those are the states that are contributing the largest share. So in terms of nitrogen, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana are contributing about 10 to 17% of that delivery to the Gulf of Mexico. On the phosphorus side, Missouri and Illinois are contributing the highest amount, Iowa, Indiana, Arkansas. The others are contributing to just a bit less of that share in the 5 to 10% range. But you can see that aligns very closely to our high production states of corn and soybeans, and have contribution, a larger share of the contribution of nutrients to the Gulf. This is a snapshot of the hypoxic zone. It is about the size of Connecticut, to give you an idea. In 2014, it grew just a little bit in 2015 from a recent report I read, to add Rhode Island to that, so just a little bit larger of a hypoxic zone. So it's certainly a significant area in the Gulf. So to address the nutrient issue, states were asked to establish state nutrient reduction strategies in order to come up with a plan to minimize the loss of nutrients from each state in the Mississippi, main stem of the Mississippi that contribute to the Gulf. So the Hypoxia Task Force was the agency or organization that established this. They coordinate activities to reduce the size and the severity and the duration of hypoxia. There's federal and state agency members on the task force. And in 2008, they came up with an action plan to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus for states in the Mississippi and Atchafalaya River Basin. So you can see here how that outlines or lays over those states that are highly agricultural. So the upper Mississippi, middle Mississippi, and lower Mississippi, along with the lower Ohio and upper Ohio, are the states that are involved in establishing those nutrient strategies in this first round of their development. So to give you an idea of what it looks like for Iowa, there are some similarities certainly in other states for their nutrient strategies, certainly some differences as well. So those of you joining in from other states, I strongly encourage you to take a look at your nutrient strategy, to familiarize yourself with it, and we'll talk through some ways that that information can be used in some of your outreach programming if you are involved in water quality programming. So Iowa's strategy is voluntary, meaning that we are not requiring, or the state is not requiring adoption of any of these practices right now. So I think that's a benefit. Farmers have appreciated that aspect of the strategy, and that they can look through the different practices and voluntarily adopt what works for them. Science-based, there was an extensive review of literature that went into this strategy. It is a plan to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus as requested by the Hypoxia Task Force. Includes cities and industry as well as agriculture. So all contributors to nutrient loss in the state have a role to play in this. It's a practice-based approach, meaning that individual practices were evaluated for their ability to reduce nitrogen and phosphorus, and set some goals and set did an evaluation of scenarios that will help us to achieve some measurable progress. And it was also identified that there's certainly a lot to learn. There's innovations that we know are always evolving and coming into existence. And so there's a framework for innovation so that new practices, as they come about and are evaluated, can be incorporated into the strategy. So it's always a living document using the best available science to address these issues. So what was discovered is no single practice will achieve the 45% goal. There's not one change that a farmer could make to address that. So it will take a combination of practices. Both rural and urban contributors need to reduce their nutrient losses. So both the point and non-point sources of nutrients will address those. And it's going to require a very high rate of adoption of many practices. As I said, no one practice. It will take a combination to reach this goal. So it's not going to be a simple, easy process. It's not just tweaking our nitrogen rates or adopting a couple of easy practices on a few acres. It's going to take a truly collaborative and comprehensive effort on the part of agriculture and urban folks to address this goal. It has many options available too, and I think that's another big benefit in terms of having a lot of flexibility to use different practices according to what works on one farm or one area of the state, according to their soils, their climate, and according to the type of operation it is, the time available they have, whether it's a yearly practice that takes seeding a cover crop each fall, or if it's establishing a wetland where there's more investment on the front end, but something that has lower year-to-year maintenance. So I'll just quickly walk through not individual practices, but how it's organized, and I encourage you, we'll put a link here to the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy documentation with this link, so you'll be able to visit this. But it's organized in changes that can be made within the field, first with nitrogen, so changes in timing, source, rate, use of application or nitrification inhibitors, use of cover crops, so things that can be done within the field with management of nitrogen to minimize the loss. Then looking at some land use changes, if it's possible to look at a perennial in the system or extending the rotation beyond corn and soybeans, adding in alfalfa or small grain, maybe using a pasture system in place of a row crop, another option there. And then looking at edge of field treatment structures, so such things as wetlands, bioreactors, edge of field buffers, or a new practice we call saturated buffers, which routes tile drainage through a buffer, moves it laterally through that buffer rather than just flowing straight through in a tile line to the stream. It intercepts it, moves it within the buffer itself, and through denitrification and plant uptake can reduce nitrate loss. So one of those relatively new innovations here in Iowa and in our surrounding states that have explored this. And I'm really excited about what the future holds in that respect, that we're just starting to implement these strategies, and already we're seeing some of these new technologies come about. So I think that will continue to happen, certainly. And then on the phosphorus side, organized very similarly, changes that can be made within the field with application of phosphorus, placement, timing, use of cover crops, minimizing tillage to reduce sediment. Again, looking at a land use change of adding perennials to the landscape, and then also those edge of field structures, in this case, terraces, buffers, and then types of sediment control basins or ponds. So the action of intercepting or stopping that sediment before it leaves the field, then we'll trap it there and reduce quite a bit of that sediment and a significant amount of phosphorus before it enters into a river or stream. So I just wanted to illustrate quickly the level of adoption it will take to reach our goal. So just highlighting a couple pieces here, I'm not going to go through everything, but right now we have about 300,000 acres of cover crops in the state. And these two scenarios look at needing 60% for one option, 95% of our acres covered as another option. So that gets into the millions of acres of cover crops. So it will take a pretty dramatic change, and the role for women in this, I think, is just supporting those changes. You know, it's going to be a culture change in our state to adopt these practices in the magnitude that it will take. We're not prescribing any of these, but it will take a dramatic shift in a lot of the adoption of the practices, and that's where I see a role for women in many aspects. So I'll get into that here as we move along. So the implementation of the strategies is happening through education and outreach to build awareness. Certainly, ISU Extension and Outreach has played a big role in that, as well as our agricultural organizations throughout the state and agencies as well. Our Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship has funded demonstration projects, and that's what you see here in the map highlighted in green, are located throughout the state to get these practices out on the landscape. Some of them are very well known, and others are quite new, such as the saturated buffers and bioreactors. So demonstrating them so that other farmers can come and see those in action, watch as they're installed, talk to that local farmer to learn about them is the focus of those projects. You know, providing statewide cost share, certainly for farmers to share some of that risk as they adopt a new practice and take a few years to learn about them, is a focus of that statewide cost share. And then certainly collaborative efforts have been huge in the implementation of the nutrient reduction strategy. We've seen partnerships arise with cities, partnering with rural areas in smaller towns, and extension and our various agricultural organizations coming together around water quality issues. And it's just been really great and positive to see those collaborative efforts and partnerships develop and work towards a common goal. So how are women involved in this issue? Well, I think the primary pieces are that women own a lot of land in Iowa. They share in the farm decision-making, whether they're the sole owner of that farm or they share ownership with a spouse or with other family members. And they have a concern for their family, for the longevity of their farm, for the viability of that farming operation, but also for the health, well-being, and viability of their whole community. So I think there's a lot of elements here and places for women to engage in improving water quality. And I think there's no better time than now, as the issue has been elevated in terms of its importance to address hypoxia, to address local water quality concerns and issues. So in Iowa, about 50% of the land is owned or co-owned by women, so either by themselves or with a spouse or family member. Women landowners that are sole owners often rent their land to farm operators. So I think this is important in terms that they have influence over this land. Maybe traditionally they weren't as big a part of the decision-making, depending on the dynamic of the individual family. But I think that is increasing, and we're addressing that issue in terms of developing more outreach and events for women and making them feel welcome at other events, so that they are able to gain the information they need about water quality practices, about soil conservation, and about the types of things that they can do on their farm to address these issues. So I think they have certainly a key role to play in supporting and making these on-farm conservation and water quality improvement decisions. Agricultural professionals are also, I think, a critical piece. They are seeing that women are a critical audience and can think of ways to develop programming and methods that connect with women. There's many on-farm roles for women, and they contribute to decision-making in different ways. But again, they often have not been the focus of management practice education and outreach in the past. We've had great projects like Annie's Project, and I see logo didn't transfer there. That red box is the Women Food and Ag Network, and the Women Caring for the Land program is a program here in Iowa, and I know they have programs throughout the Midwest that focus on that very issue in creating outreach for women and events for women so that they feel that they have a place for that discussion where they can ask any question they want without feeling silly. And that space has been created by the Women Caring for the Land program and those folks that work with that program. And we've partnered with them on quite a few different events, and it's been great to see that project evolve. So speaking to many of you, I see that you're from different places from around the state and outside of the state. I see a few folks from Extension. And so if you're asking yourself, what can I do to improve water quality, I really encourage you to reach out to women in your programming efforts. Get to know your conservation partners. Let them know you're interested in developing programming or making sure that women aren't left out of the conversation. So those typically are your Natural Resources Conservation Service professionals, Soil and Water Conservation Service. Public Works departments often provide assistance for urban practices and can be a great resource. Gather those resources and information, build knowledge. And then another big part of it, I think, is supporting farmer leaders. Another piece of the partnership efforts that I've seen grow around the state have been the stepping up by farmers to be leaders of these issues and tell their story and share their messages about how they've adopted different practices on their farm. And there's many women leaders that are also a part of this. It's not just the typical male farmer that are adopting these practices. I see a lot of support from the spouse or those sole owners of the farming operation and that have adopted practices and are willing to share their story and help other farmers learn that peer-to-peer network building that's been done. So one of those outstanding farmers is Kellie Blair. And I'm going to turn it over to her now to share her experiences with the Iowa Nutrient Reduction Strategy, with soil and water conservation on her farm. And after that, we'll have a discussion. So please keep putting your questions into the chat box, and we'll address those after Kellie is finished.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Kellie Blair, and I am a farmer in north central Iowa. And here's some of my information on this slide, just my contact information if you're at all interested with follow-up questions, and my blog and that type of thing. Just a little background on myself. I grew up on a family crop and livestock farm in western Iowa, so in the Less Hills of Iowa. So a very different landscape than where I live now in north central Iowa, very flat, dark soil landscape here. So growing up in the Less Hills kind of started my love for conservation. My dad was very conservation-minded on our farm and taught me a lot. I went to Iowa State University and graduated in forestry and agronomy. And right after graduating from Iowa State in December of 2006, I started working for the Mashoff, which is a hog integrator from Illinois, as an agronomist here in Iowa. I worked there for about 8 years, and it was there that I earned my Certified Crop Advisor certification, where basically I just have to keep going to school and continue to keep up on my credits to make sure that I am certified. I am also a technical service provider, so for the NRCS, if anyone is receiving cost share, I can write nutrient management plans or comprehensive nutrient management plans, and those are approved then through the state. There, it was also where I learned my love and my need for being an advocate for agriculture. And with that, my husband, AJ, and my two kids, Wyatt and Charlotte, I'll also obviously share that love of agriculture. And right now, Wyatt is 6 and Charlotte's 4, and we farm in north central Iowa. We have corn, soybeans, pigs, and cattle. The pigs are in confinement. We have about 3,600 of those, and then we have about, we have a monoslope cattle barn, so all that manure is together, and we apply it where we need to, and we have a cow-calf operation as well. So outside of the home, I work in the Boone River watershed in north central Iowa. And Jamie had shown a slide about the water quality initiative projects, and one of those projects is I contract for Iowa Soybean Association to help facilitate and assist farmers in putting those practices on their farm. So being boots on the ground and having some other goals in mind to get those in place. Like I said, in north central Iowa, we're very flat. So tile drainage is very important for our farm because that's basically the only way we could farm. Otherwise, it would be too wet where we farm. And we know from the nutrient reduction strategy and water quality studies that we have an impact. So I'm going to go through some of the things that we do on our farm currently to help mitigate the negative impact. We have a couple of wetlands, and those have been implemented through the CRP program. And this is basically, we just take out acres that don't produce and we put them into a wetland. It's basically financial decision making. So our crops don't produce, so we can continue to help ourselves out financially, but then we also know the benefits of putting it into perennial vegetation, and it kind of adds an aesthetic impact to the farm that obviously looks really nice. Sorry, there we go. Nutrient management. Because of the manure on our farm, manure is our main source of nutrients on our farm for swine manure and cattle manure. Because of that, we do have a nutrient management plan, but outside of those manure acres, we do budget what comes off the farm and what goes into the ground. So we follow a plan, and we sample our manure so we know what nutrients are being put on what acres. We sample the soil so we know where and what acres need more phosphorus or more potassium or less. And we do all spring nitrogen application. We've done that for quite a while now. We side dress our anhydrous in the spring to better use those nutrients for the crop while it's growing, as opposed to putting it on in the fall, which we put most of our manure on in the fall. So that's another thing that we do. Tillage. We do strip till, we do no-till, and we do conventional tillage. It kind of depends on certain things like the weather, timing, and that type of thing. So in the left-hand picture there, we actually no-till all of our soybeans into standing corn. So all that residue is left on top of the soil, and we found that there's no yield difference between tillage and no-till. So obviously we're saving ourselves some time in just planting right into that. You can see our strip till machine in that bottom picture, and so that we just make strips in the fall, and we put on our nutrients, any commercial nutrients we put on with that rig there, and it doesn't cultivate the entire piece of ground, but just strips. So we plant right into those strips that next spring. And you can see in that upper picture, you can kind of see, if you look real closely, you can see where the strips had been made for the corn, and you can see an area where the nitrogen was side dressed after the corn was planted. So, like I said, it depends on timing. Last fall, we didn't get any of our strips made last fall because weather, we froze up pretty early, so we couldn't do it. And we change every year. It doesn't seem like we do any one thing on on all of our acres, but we have to adapt depending on what the year brings to us. Cover crops. We've implemented cover crops for the last 5 years on our farm. We started out using cost share funds, and now we've used up our own funds on our farm, so now we're doing it all somewhat out of pocket. We know that there's a benefit in this, so we need to figure out how it works on our farm and to make it work. Like Jamie had said, the nutrient reduction strategy is voluntary, but as a farmer, I don't feel that it's optional. I think we need to figure out how it's going to work now, and while there's cost shares available to us, it's a great time to do it. So this year we're actually adding a little bit more. We added more last year, and this year we're doing a little bit further. So we started out with just rye. The rye we plant into standing beans. You can see in that bottom right-hand corner. And we've applied it into standing corn. The aerial applied, and we've used that Hagie high boy machine to apply into standing crop. In north central Iowa, we have a short window to get it applied and to grow. So it'll grow then, hopefully, if we get moisture throughout the fall, and then overwinter. The rye will overwinter, and then next spring come up. Last year we did some, I guess, radish and turnips, and those don't overwinter, so we only have that fall cover. We did, on the turnips, we put our cattle out onto corn stalks with the turnips and had them graze that over winter. This year, we are going to try to bale some, I guess next spring, we're going to try to bale some triticale for our cattle, and we're going to, again, overwinter our cattle on corn stalks in a rye and tillage, rye and turnips mix. So we're trying to integrate the cattle into our cover crop system to diversify a little bit and to make those cover crops really work and fit into our farm. Another thing we implemented in 2013 is water sampling, and these pictures are a little bit deceiving because we actually tile water samples. So we take water samples out of our tile, and those are on acres that we know what we're draining. So if any changes would be made to that particular piece of ground, we would know what changes were made. There's expansive tile systems within Iowa, so we want to make sure that if we're going to sample something, we know what's happening within the water coming through that. We take those biweekly from April through September. We look at those and we send it down to the Iowa Soybean Association. They have a water sample lab, and we test it for nitrates and dissolved phosphorus within those to see what impact we have. It's been kind of an aha moment for ourselves on the farm. When we first started, we took tile samples, and out of that tile was, the previous year was soybeans and prevent plant because we were tiling it during the year. And so that piece of ground did not have any nitrogen applied to it for about over a year and a half probably. And it was one of the highest samples throughout the state for nitrates. And that kind of showed us that we can try everything we can in field to try to mitigate the nitrates coming off of our field, but our soils are very high in organic matter. So we need to prepare for those wet years where water flow is high, and nitrates are going to come from those high organic matter areas. And we need to figure out how to mitigate that, how to slow that down and keep it on our farm rather than running down the streams and tile and that type of thing. So this year, when I guess the 2014, when we took them, they're a little bit lower than the year before. And then this coming year after 2015, we are actually applying cover crops this fall. So I'll be interested to see what the samples do going forward to reduce nitrates coming out of that water. And, you know, that's just one of the examples of using data on our own farm to make decisions and trying to figure out what's happening, especially through the biological aspects of nitrates and soil organic matter, because we want to build our soils and we want to keep that water clean. And it's a process, and it's a detailed process, but it's a lot of learning, so it's a lot of fun to go through it. So obviously, you know, there's a lot of challenges and decisions on our farm. we don't have one overall practice. Like I said, we don't do all no-till and we don't do all conventional till. We do a little of whatever, I guess, Mother Nature has in store for us. Anything we do today is a candidate for change. We want to be conservation-minded, and that kind of goes into we want to reduce, the use of our time. We want to reduce money. We want to save our money, and we want to make sure the environmental concerns are small coming off of our farm. So, as an example, tillage was a no-brainer. It saves us time, it saves us money, and we know the benefits of that soil, conserving that soil, leaving the residue on top, and building the soil organic matter. Cover crops, though, has been a little bit harder decision to make whole farm. It takes more time for us because we have to apply it and we have to kill it if it comes back in the spring. It takes more money because it really hasn't made an impact that we've seen yet on our yield to benefit us yet. But we do know that it's great for the environment. We know that it saves the soil. We know that it holds nutrients in the soil, holds it there over winter rather than going down the tile drains. So that's not a bad thing. Some decisions, just like those, are easier to make than others, but just trying to figure out how to do all of it and how to make the cover crops, because they take more time and money, how to diversify within our own farm. How can we get those a little bit further? How do we use that money to help with the cattle? How do we use that time to help with the cattle and that type of thing? So, our changes are based on research. We want to make sure that what's been done and what's being done makes sense for everybody. What we try to do on our farm is more than anything field-based decisions, because the majority of our ground is rented. So another big part in our farm is relaying some of the things that we're trying and doing on our farm to landowners so that they can play a role in the water quality issues that are here in Iowa. Like I said, changes are made on research, and there's a ton of resources available to us in Iowa. Some of those are the NRCS. You can't really see it on that slide very well. The NRCS and soil and water conservation districts, there's funding. So going in and asking about what's available within your own watershed to know what resources are available to you. Agronomists and experts, there's a lot of agronomists that know what works for cover crops and what doesn't. And farmers are experts, so asking another farmer, knowing what they do and comparing it and figuring out what works for them. Iowa Soybean Association and other commodity groups. The Iowa Soybean Association has helped us with our own on-farm research. I have a treatment result that we had got we did trials of 15-inch rows versus 30-inch rows for soybeans. They help analyze that. So, we can look at, some of the things that we're doing. They help us analyze those results because we have a whole lot of information based off of precision technology, and there's a lot of things you can do with it, which is very cool. But to have someone who knows a little bit more about statistics and helping us out did it, your rate of return, did it help you or did it not do anything, or did it hurt you? So using them to find those resources is great. Iowa State University Extension has been a great resource for research and making sure that the research that they're doing is relevant to us and having that relationship. That's another bullet point that didn't show up here, is relationships are very important to us, and we base a lot of our decision making off of those relationships. So trusting and asking questions is great for the people that you work with. So continual improvement on our farm is basically, I think, key on our farm. There's a lot of issues within agriculture right now. Consumers, sustainability, being transparent, water quality, and, with having kids, the next generation, and education about agriculture. Things are ever changing, and, like Jamie said, supporting farmer leaders. I think there's some great stories on the landscape, and empowering, even farmers and women farmers on what they know, empowering them to tell their story is pretty important. So I just have a showing of kind of everything that I'm involved in and with. And what it all kind of started out with was Annie's project within Iowa. And that is a great program to help. It really helped me out. You know, there's a lot of details within farming, so they couldn't tell me exactly how to run a farm throughout the whole project, but they gave me some great resources, some other great women who one of them is now a good friend of mine, and that's where I had first met her. And I mean, knowing what resources are out there is very important, and that's kind of what got me started. My husband encouraged me. He wanted me to be a part of the farm, and he said, you know what, you should do this, you know, and learn and meet some people about how they're involved with the farm. And Annie's project then spun off, and I got involved with. Now I'm involved with about anything I can be. You know, all the commodity groups, the Iowa Soybean Association, corn growers, Farm Bureau, pork producers, and cattlemen, using them and as resources for what is going on across the landscape of Iowa, but also to let them know what's important to me as far as policy and decision making at that level. Iowa State University in agriculture has always been a great place for me to learn. And now I'm on the ISU Extension Council for Webster County. So it's kind of taking me a little bit further outside of agriculture and how extension and outreach works within the rural community. So, you know, being involved is my big part on our farm. I don't make the everyday decisions. My husband does pretty much all the marketing. I'm more here for, I have the water quality experience and, you know, supporting those decisions and telling him what I've heard across the state of Iowa of what's worked and what people are trying. And we bounce a lot of ideas off of other farmers and other people. So, again, relationships is kind of where that all stems from. And my role is just being here and being a supporter of our farm and an advocate for our farm to help our landowners that we farm for know what's going on. So I also blog and tell about, you know, what's kind of going on. And it's been a lot of fun within the last 10 years getting involved and playing a part. So I think, you know, my overall idea of how women are involved is those relationships. There's a lot of relationships to be had, and there's a lot of roles within all of these places that I show here. Certified crop advisors on there too. It kind of got goofed up, but just playing a role and being involved and being someone that you can talk to is a great start for women. And you know, it's easier for me to go to another woman to ask questions. And so as a young woman within agriculture, just having a mentor there to bounce ideas off of for questions or even vent. Sometimes you need to do that too. So I guess that's pretty well all that I have. If you have any questions, go ahead and write them in if you have any for either Jamie or I. But I appreciate you having me.
Thanks so much, Kellie and Jamie. Those were awesome presentations. I want to give people a moment or two to ask their questions. If you have any to type in or observations, I can see that some people are typing. So, Kellie, while we're waiting, what do you think is like next for like the next step for your farm? Like, what's the next thing that you wanted to do or implement?
That's a great question. We have ideas about every day. And some of them are pretty far-fetched, but I think, you know, things change every day, and just being around to help with, you know, I can't remember, somebody had told me once that I'm where I'm needed when they need me. I don't really have one particular role, but if they need help in the field, I'm pretty well available with my part-time job to be where I need to be. So, you know, talking about those decisions and just being involved throughout the process is very important. In the next few years, we're taking over another farm operation. So that's going to make me really play a bigger role because we don't quite yet have enough to hire a full-time farmhand, and so within the time that we can afford that, my role is just going to be helping out and making sure that we're not, making sure that the decisions that we're making isn't going to be, throw the farm down under the bus. So that's going to be my main role, is just to be a part of it. So
great, thanks. And how about for you, Jamie? Like, what do you think are going to be the prime things that you're going to be looking into as a outreach and educator?
So a couple of things that Kelly highlighted are a main focus that we hope to expand. One of those is the monitoring that she mentioned that they've been involved with the Iowa Soybean Association, and we've heard stories like Kelly's where that was such a turning point for farmers to be able to have that opportunity to measure water either in a local stream that their farm impacts or from the tile drainage. So we're piloting a project now and we've created some easy testing kits that have just a test strip that gives you an immediate result. It doesn't have the accuracy that a sample that is sent to a lab has, but it's a very quick and easy way to just get you a baseline of throughout the year what kind of nitrates are moving from your farm. So that's something that we hope to engage farmers and landowners in terms of just as a starting point for decision making. Where do they stand right now? To help them either prioritize fields or just to start gathering information.
Mm-hmm.
Another part is, like I mentioned, how critical the farmer leaders are. We're learning more and more about who those leaders are, and farmers are very modest and don't always like to tell their story and say that they have the solution that others should adopt and that kind of thing. So we know that's difficult, but it's so important, and a peer farmer with research backing is such a vital part of this. And so we hope to support those farmers that are doing that already, like Kelly, and telling their story, and then supporting others in doing that as well, so that we continue to have these hubs. We see in areas of the state where we've had some strong leadership around cover crops and other practices that are highly visible, that we see those pockets start to emerge of higher levels of adoption around. And we know that those farmer leaders have had the influence there and have been a driving force in those increased acres of adoption. So I know that's a key piece for me. As our role in Extension is to take research information and deliver it in a way that it's useful and helpful to farmers. And I think partnering with those great farmer leaders is a great way to deliver that. So that's where I see two focus areas that we'll work on a lot in this next year.
Is there any particular initiatives to work with landowners, and in particular women landowners, to help them?
Sure,
be part of this solution.
Oh, sorry, I keep talking over you. I partner a lot with Women Caring for the Land, so I hope that continues as they invite women professionals to be a part of those discussions, and they have a learning component with some field tours of practices, so participating in those. Madeline Schultz, who's on the call today, or on the webinar today, we are collaborating on some new projects and hope to develop some programming directed toward women farmers, so that we can keep reaching women. And as Kelly described, there's so many decisions to be made on a farm, and I think there's a role in helping to sift through the information. If there's any negative of all of the collaboration and partnerships, is that we've just created so much information, and it's a lot to work through. And I think that's another piece for women, is to help be a sounding board for those ideas, help to look through all of those pieces of information, websites, and publications, and content, and help to make those decisions and be a key part of that.
Great. Well, thanks to both of you. We have about 2 minutes left. I haven't seen any other questions. A couple of lots of thanks for what you shared and the examples and inspiration. Amy is typing, so I'll give Amy a chance to type. But maybe I don't know that I can advance the slide. Maybe if someone could advance. I think we have a couple more slides, questions, and I think the last one is just to remind you, and I'm going to take this, that we'll be sending you a survey. It just means a lot to us to get your feedback about this webinar and what you'd like for the future. So you can cut and paste. I'm not sure I can get this into the chat pod right now. You can go here right afterwards, or we'll send it to you if we have your email address. And I just also wanted to give kind of a preview that we'll be starting a series on thanks Lisa, on farm transfer and farm transition planning for women farmers and their families within the fall. We're going to be doing a short series on that. So we hope you can join us for that as well. And I think it's never too early to think about what happens with your business and your land for the long term. So I think that should give interest to women of all ages, backgrounds, and participation in agriculture. So thanks to Kelly and Jamie and Lisa, and to all of you who joined us. And so it's the hour's up, and I'm going to sign off.
Thank you.
Thank you.